24th. Do 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 boo boo boo. Can anybody hear me? Is the question now. Can anybody hear me? Is the question now. Is anybody gonna show up this week, I wonder?
Hmm.
All right. Well, looks like about to get started here. So I should mute myself so we aren't in an echo time. That's not fun. All right. Well, let's jump into it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to preseason week number 2 of the Horsehead Weekly, your weekly source for Horsehead Fantasy Football news. I am, of course, Mark, the commissioner, and I'm coming at you with week number 2 in our series about what are we going to do this year? Are we going to change stuff up? Are we going to keep it the same? How are we going to do now? Week number 1, that was pretty much a gimme. Like, we're going to have something. I called it draft day. It could be auction day, it could be hybrid day, and that's what we're going to get into today. But just because we figured that, but we did figure out some stuff last week. So that's what we're going to start off with, and then we're going to jump into the discussion of auctions versus hybrids versus drafts, and I'm pretty sure I use every combination in every order at some point in this because I am not good at figuring out consistency. And of course, as always, we got to go fast. So let's get going and with last week's update. So we decided on the draft date. It seems like everyone is available. If not 100%, their schedule is clear on Saturday, August 24th at 8 o'clock EST. That is 5 o'clock PST, right? I don't think I have anybody else in any time zones right now. So pretty much everyone has that time available. Some people have some obligations, like they're in another league that doesn't matter, so they can just ignore that draft and do our draft instead. But for the most part, yeah, we're locked in. This is our draft date. So everyone, mark your calendars and etch it in stone. Literally chisel it onto your iPhone or Apple, or Android device because that is when we're having it. The location, well, we didn't quite figure that one out. We had a lot of people volunteering. We had Malcolm volunteering, James volunteering, I volunteered. So who knows where we're going to end up doing the physical party because it is a Saturday night, so we can all sit around, we can have a couple drinks, we can have a good time. Maybe get together a little earlier and do like dinner and then just kind of hang out for a little bit and shit talk each other before we actually jump into 8 o'clock here on the East Coast. So that's what we got going on right now, and I will keep you posted here as to where we are going for the draft location. But I'm sure if you also are in the league itself, you'll see that discussion going all over in Slack as we get closer, and we'll make a decision at that point. The draft positions. So this is just another update. We talked about this last time. Your positions must be submitted before noon on 8/12/19. So that gives everybody, if you go back, it's on the 24th, this is on the 12th. So that gives everybody 2 weeks, about 12 days, to sit down and really figure out what their draft strategy is going to be. This way, you can, you don't have the situation where because Mike is going first, he's going second, they can really grind out what position they want ahead of everybody else because they know what it's going to be. Where someone like me, who I think is ninth pick, I'm basically taking whatever the leftovers are. So, and I think this is going to be a really interesting year for draft positions because I think a lot of people have different ideas as to where that first tier drops off. And it's also not like last year. Where last year you looked at the draft rankings and it was like, okay, there is a clear number one. It's just without a doubt, if you can get Todd Gurley, you take Todd Gurley. He was God Turley last year. This year, not so much. So I feel like it's a really good year for everyone to maybe try to figure out like, so where do I want to go? How do I want to pick? Do I want to be late in the first round so I can get the double pick? Because you think the tier's really long, it doesn't really matter who you get in the first round. So you'd rather get that really good second round pick, or do you want to be super early and just lock something in? Or if you're somebody who really wants Ertz, maybe you want to make sure you're going middle late in the first, so that way you can grab Ertz on the way back through before he's going to get picked up by somebody else. I think it's a really interesting year for draft position. So make sure you have them into me before 8/12/19. We still got almost a month. I mean, It's what 26 days away, 27 days away. Plenty of time for everyone to practice and really, at least figure out where they think they sit on a lot of stuff. And we'll even be a couple weeks into the preseason football at that point, so everyone will have a good idea as to how they want stuff to go. So that is what's going on with the draft positions. That's your quote unquote quick reminder. And now let's jump into this week's weekly topic: draft versus hybrid versus auction. So the idea for this week is we're going to figure out how we are selecting our players. Year after year, in the majority of leagues that I do, and I think everyone does, it's a draft. You sit down. Okay, round one, you take somebody, and then you don't do anything until your round two pick, and then your round three pick. Some people get a little spicy with it. There are some groups that will skip the third round or the fifth round in order to make it a little bit more fair, because that way the person who gets the first overall pick, they do technically. Some people have run the numbers, like, oh, they get a little bit of an advantage, get the first overall pick, and then they get the first and the third round. In being so late in the second is actually not as big of a hindrance as being at the end of the first, beginning of the second. So blah blah blah. So they do some shenanigans with it, but for the most part, it's just a snake draft, and we do this every year, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that a draft is a really good way to do it. It makes it so that you get a really good idea as to about where your team's going to end up. You can go into different strategies, but for the most part, you have to wait for the draft to come to you. You have to sit there and be like, well, do I take a quarterback now because there might be a run in the meantime, or do I just sit because, I really like this guy who's like quarterback 25 on everybody's board, but man, I just think Kyler Murray is going to light it up. He's going to be this year's Patrick Mahomes. So I'm just going to use my, big dick energy to grab him in the 15th round and then just school everybody with him all throughout the year. Who knows? But I think there's a lot of strategy, a lot of depth to it. But there's an alternative that there's been some rumblings about, because I think people are starting to look at this league and be like, well, what can we do that's a little bit, how can we get spicy? How can we get fancy with it? And you can definitely do that with an auction. Because with an auction, you put players on a block and then you bid on them, which means, in theory, somebody could bid on the number 1 overall pick in most drafts, the number 2 overall pick, the number 3 overall pick, and if it breaks their way, they could get the first 3 picks normally in a draft, and they could just have their running back 1, running back 2, and their flex just locked in at the beginning of the season with 3 absolute studs. Now, that would mean that the rest of the people at the auction would have to be, sitting back and letting this person do this, because for the most part, that's not going to be actually something you can do. But you could probably get maybe the first 2 picks overall in a draft if you really wanted to, and then you could just fill in the rest of your draft with just absolute dollar $2 players for the rest of the time. But yeah, I think it's a really different way of doing it, and allows you to build teams that you could never build in a draft. You're never getting 2 first-round picks in a draft unless we allow draft pick trading again and let people just go absolutely bananas with it. I don't think we ever got that far previously, but I really think it's pretty interesting to see how we could break this down and really go crazy with this auction, and see how people do it. Now, the final one is hybrid. So with the hybrid option, I just picked 6 players. We could discuss it more later. If people have a different number that people tend to like, of course, we're going to go with that. I'm the commissioner. I'm not, I'm not the evil overlord yet of the league. I got machinations in place, but we're not there yet. So, but for the hybrid, yeah. So we would look to do is we look to do 6 players get auctioned off. And then, so everyone gets basically 7 roster spots that they start off with. So each player auctions 6 players. And then the 7th slot is where you're going to start in the draft. So let's say you don't really care about players. You already drafted 2 or 3 people. You can throw down, I don't know, if it's a $100 budget, you can throw $10 down on being the number 1 pick in quote-unquote round 7 if you really want to do that. And you can just have that spot, and then there you go. I feel like that's an interesting way of doing it and handling it. or it could just be whoever has the most money at the end. So it's kind of like, it's kind of like you're bidding on it at the end. But we can figure that out at the end if we end up going hybrid. We'll probably have to make that into its own another weekly topic. I might have to move some stuff around if that's the case. But yeah, so we got the draft, the auction, the hybrid. That's what's going on now. I'm going to break it down a little bit further because I understand that people come here. For my opinion, this isn't. I'm not going to sit here and just be like, yeah, no, here's a bunch of information. Um, and then that's just what you have. So let's break it down by the different things. So pros and cons for the draft. For doing a draft is what we do every year. So everybody can sit down and they know what's going on. Everyone's comfortable with it. Nobody's going to be sitting here pulling their hair out going, oh my God, I can't believe I have to do a draft. This is crazy. I don't know what I'm doing. Um, yeah, everyone knows how to do a draft. Everyone's done it a bunch. And it will make the 17 rounds that we have this year for players, it'll make it go, it's the fastest way to do it. Because you only get so many seconds of time that you have before your pick is up, and you either forfeit the pick or you random the pick. It keeps the pace up. Um, but you also have this thing with 17 rounds where that's it goes fast. So you're not going to be sitting there for 4 or 5 hours hopefully. And another reason that the draft is good is because it makes the World Cup more meaningful. I mean, in an auction, it's probably not going to do much of anything. It'll probably just decide who nominates first, which is like fine, I guess. If people want to do like, I'm sure people have auction strategies where they like, oh, I'm gonna nominate a bunch of people who I can get for $1, and if someone wants to bid up to $2, I'll go for 3 and then stop. It's like, all right, cool. I mean, that's fine if that's what you want to do, but I feel like this is the most meaningful way to use the World Cup. If we throw the World Cup out, that's fine. I mean, everyone had a good time with it. I don't think everyone enjoyed it as much as last year because this year it was hard to watch the World Cup versus stuff like the Olympics or the full World Cup last year, which was you could see everything on that. Just boot up any computer and you can jump on. Now for the draft cons, uh, like I was saying before, you can only take what's there at your pick. You don't have the option of building this studs and duds lineup or these super teams or anything like that. All you can get is what's there at your pick. So you sit that, so you get to round 7, you look at what you got on round 7, you go, okay, guess I'm taking something here. Who's left on my board? You don't really get to do anything crazy. Um, Another issue is you really, and this is kind of silly, you can't mess with people. I would love it to see people in auctions just kind of like being like, I'll bid an extra buck, I'll bid an extra buck, just to like, because that guy who's like, oh my God, I absolutely have to have Le'Veon Bell or absolutely have to have Zach Ertz. Well, you can sit there and you can just kind of, make them pay an extra $5 for him, maybe. In a draft, you really can't do that. The only way you can really mess with somebody is if you know that they're a huge fan of somebody, you can take them before them and then kind of hold them ransom and trade later on. But at the same time, it's like, well, maybe you can't actually do that. So, whatever. And the final con is because it is 17 rounds, because of the structure of the league, it is going to be a little imbalanced at the end. Yes, the last round is probably just going to be kickers or, some maybe safeties or something like that, like a position that people don't really care about. But at the same time, you really have to just take a look at the con, that is a con. It is going to be a little bit unbalanced, even if the players at the very end should be low impact. Also, if you guys want to just get rid of kickers again and just hold like a little coup in Slack, I'm fine with it. Just go ahead and be like, yo, can we just get rid of kickers? Go down to 16 teams or 16 players. That'd be great. Like I'd be like, oh man, I guess that's what the people want. Whatever. I'm just saying, whatever you want to do, boys. So woo, slow down. So the next one is the auction, and yes, I know it says draft versus hybrid versus auction, and my order is draft, auction, hybrid. Don't at me. Um, so for the auction, the pros is like I was saying, unlocks so many strategies. You can do, you can basically pick a ton of players from rounds like 3 through 7, and build your team around that, or you can be the guy who takes like 2 first round guys and a second round guy, and then everyone else is like waiver wire fodder. It's all garbage picks from there on out because you got $1 per player left at the end, and you're just scraping that bottom of the barrel and just hoping for the best. Just like, yeah, let's hope that these guys, no one gets hurt, because if they do, I'm totally ruined. And another thing about it is it makes people put money where their mouth is. In an auction, you are sitting there, and if you're like, man, and you're talking a big game running up to the auction, you're like, yeah, I love this guy. He's going to be great. I think he's absolutely going to knock it out of the park this year. He's going to be the next phenom. Everyone's sleeping on him. And then all of a sudden you show up at the auction and he hits $5 and you're like, I'm out. Well, what the hell, dude? That's not that's not right. You can't do that. You can't talk a big game and then back down when you're getting your feet held to the fire with it. Like that's kind of nonsense. So, that's something I'm really interested in. Like are we sitting here and are people actually going to do what they say, or are they just going to kind of sit back and be sad? So I like that about the auction. And finally, it requires some economics knowledge and some fantasy knowledge as well. So you need to be able to, it's a very different strategy because it's not see who's there, take the best guy. It's now like, is this player worth a quarter of my auction budget? Like, is this person that much better than other people? Is this person being outbid versus who else is in their tier? I think it's a really cool thing for that to do with auctions. Now, auctions also have cons. It it's a lot. The first one, the major one is 100%. The main thing is it's so much better when you have 13 people in a room, one person for each team, and then an auctioneer. Who in this case would probably end up being Tyler or something. I think that'd be pretty cool. But yeah, so you just have this thing where everyone's in the room together and people are yelling over each other and people are outbidding each other and getting all crazy about it. I think that's great. I think that would be absolutely phenomenal to do. Now, um, we can't do that unless one of us hits a lottery and like charters planes, we fly everyone together somewhere and we do the draft. We aren't in a situation where we can get people from all around the country together physically, and I don't. And the technology is there where you can do an auction draft, not all together. You can do it on like whatever draft website you want. They'll have an auction option, but it just doesn't feel like the same to me. I'm not a huge fan of it. I think it's kind of I don't know. I just as much as I would absolutely love it if we went out and could make it all together, we can't. So that's a big con on it. Another big con of it is auctions last a much much longer time because you have to give everybody time to account for latency if you're not there together. Brain latency you have to account for. So somebody bids somebody up by $1. Now you have to wait 5 more seconds. And someone else goes up $1. You got to wait 5 more seconds, or 10 seconds even. So you're sitting there and you're just like, okay, this one player has lasted 3 minutes because people keep inching it up and hemming and hawing and then inching it up. So it does take a lot longer. And then another issue with auctions that I don't think a lot of people think about, which if some people might consider it a pro, is that your mistakes 100% will compound. So you sit down and you say, okay, Julio Jones is up. And you go in and you're like 45% of my budget on Julio Jones. And then Hopkins comes up in the next round, comes up right after that, and he goes for 35%. Well, those two players aren't so different that it's worth 10% of your budget more. So suddenly you just are out 10% of your budget. And you're sitting there and you're like, well, I guess I just don't have that money anymore. I guess I'm just kind of stuck and I have nothing I can do. I just lost a bunch of money. It's not worth it, but it's gone now. Heck me, I guess. So, I mean, some people might like that because they're like, oh, great, I get to, my opponents make a mistake. Suddenly they're out a bunch of money, and then all of a sudden that means they don't spend money on other people, or maybe they get antsy and they're like, I guess I gotta be careful with who I bid on. So all of a sudden they're not bidding on people that they typically would like, and then they're stuck with a bunch of money at the end because they spent money early. It's a lot. It's a lot, and it's something to consider. because it's a completely different skill than we're used to using. Now, the third option here is the hybrid option. So this, in theory, makes the best of both worlds because you get the auction for the early parts, so you can really go for that crazy, stud strategy where you take like 2 first rounders and then a bunch of 6th rounders, or you can go for the lower end strategy where you take like all your team is out of the third round. So you don't have any of those top end guys, but your team is just solid in the middle. Like you have just great players throughout the core of your team. So it has a really great strategy and stuff. But after that, then it goes into a draft. So even if you do completely screw up the auction part, you're not stuck there with no money at the end because you then get to draft the rest. You're not stuck sitting there if you bet a bunch of money early on some players and got it cashed in and you got a bunch of players. And you were sitting there with $10. You're not sitting there twiddling your thumbs for 2 hours while people bid on other players you can't get until you finally get down to the low end and you can finally start taking guys. So it really does have the best of both worlds because you've got that deep strategy. It's not as crazy time-wise. Everyone can be involved, even if they do go all in early. I think that's a big advantage of the hybrid. The issue with the hybrid is it's still has an auction part. So if you're an out-of-towner, well, now you still have to rely on another website. You have to be able to handle it. And on top of that, you can't really do this on most websites. I have yet to find a website. I haven't been looking a ton because that's later on, but there's not a lot of websites that allow you to do a hybrid. As much fun as it would be, what we'd probably end up having to do is create a league, run on some website, run an auction for 6 rounds. At the end of the 6 rounds, end it, and just say, okay, we're done. And then everyone has to write down their picks and then draft those picks in the first 6 rounds, and then we go. And I don't think, I mean, that's fine. It's, but it is something to consider. And the last part is if we do a hybrid, an auction, we're gonna have to make some things up. Like, okay, what budget do we want? This, that, the other thing. But for a hybrid, there's no real rules for it. Like, no one really, you're not gonna be able to just take like the stock auction rules off of ESPN and do an auction, and do the auction half and then jump into the draft after. So we'll have to make up a lot more stuff, which means we have a lot more chance of messing something up, getting something wrong, and people being like, "Oh my God, this is the worst! I can't believe we made this horrible decision." Another thing is you can't, and everyone has their own way of preparing, but you can't just go to a website and say, okay, so if I'm drafting in an auction only this first 6 rounds. If I'm only auctioning off the first 6 rounds, how much do I pay? Because in a regular draft, maybe Saquon Barkley is going, or a regular auction, maybe Saquon Barkley is going for 40%. Well, if you don't have to worry about round 7 through 17, well, maybe he's worth 55, 60. There's no real way you can just like look that up easily. So the meta is gonna be entirely like there's nothing there that you can just look at quick. The meta is gonna be crazy for us, which I think maybe I think that's actually a pro. Now I'm thinking about it more because that's gonna be crazy because we have to make up all this stuff on the fly. You can't just sit there and say, well, I got $100 budget, so how am I gonna spend it on players in 6 rounds? Like you can't just go to a website. So, but yeah, so that's the pros and cons for all of that. So for this week, the way I'm going to do it, because this is a fundamental core change to how we are running the league, I'm going to make it a supermajority. So you can't sit there and have it be, 6 votes to 5 and one person abstaining, or, it's 4-3 with a bunch of abstains. We can't do that. We need 8 positive votes for being okay for changing it from a draft. Now, let's say you want it to be a draft, but you're fine with hybrid and auction. That's a yes vote for that. That is yes, I'm okay with changing it from a draft. Because that first vote is making sure that there's enough people okay with it that we're not going to have a revolt. We're not going to have people quitting when they find out that they have to do an auction or a hybrid. Um, so it's not draft or not draft. It is should we advance the vote to see if there is draft hybrid auction? Now, if you're a diehard drafter, don't be a dick about it and be like, I need it to be a draft. So I'm going to vote that I'm not okay with it changing from a draft, even though an auction and hybrid would be fine for me. I'm just going to just do the thing where I just nuke the whole thing and I'm just not going to even make it. Shut up. Don't be that guy. Um, so the first one is, are we okay with changing it from a draft to something else? And then if those 8 votes come in, then we will have the draft versus hybrid versus auction, and that will require a majority. And if we don't get a majority in one vote, then we'll cut out the bottom option and do it again. Um, so let's say it's draft 4, hybrid 4, auction 3, and 1 abstain. Then we'll cut off the auction and then do it again, and then hopefully we'll have a majority at that point. Um, I mean, if it's like 5-4 with some abstentions, at that point, I'm fine with it. If we're down to the final 2, and we've gotten through the first 2 rounds of voting, because I guess we could have up to 3 votes this week, then we'll do that. So that will, of course, happen on Friday on Slack. In the meantime, feel free to have these discussions in Slack about how you feel about this. Do you like the hybrid? Do you like the auction? Should we stay as a draft? What are your pros and cons? Did I miss anything? Because I want to make sure that I get a fair representation to everybody as to what's going on. So I'd love it if people could sit down and really, maybe just type up a couple things and just say, hey, this is what's going on, this is how I feel, blah, 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 blah. So that is what is going on for the votes this week. So let's have a discussion now in Slack. And when I say now, I mean like over the next couple days. And then Friday we'll do the final vote on which date we prefer. Man, Mark, you're not good at this. Then Friday we'll vote on which format we prefer. And from there we will advance on to next week. Next week, if we need to discuss things like how we're going to do the auction, how we're going to do the hybrid, stuff like that, I'll bring that up next week as well. I'll kind of try to lump that in. But the core focus of next week is keepers. Are we doing keepers? That's the main thing, and that will again be we have to have an 8 out of 12 votes of people saying I'm okay with keepers, and then at that point it'll be, we'll do like we did with this one where we whittle it down until we have either a majority vote saying they want something, or 2 votes left, and then the winner wins. And then But if you have any strong opinions on keepers, any pros you can think of, any cons, if you wanted me to go crazy and make it, talk about full-on dynasty, where this is more of a startup draft than anything else. I mean, I think that'd be pretty crazy. Even if we can, I'd really enjoy to do a dynasty league. I think that'd be a lot of fun. But yeah, I don't think this league converting it into that is what we want to do. I think we want to do it a little differently, where we maybe start a second league if people want to do a dynasty league. Even if it's just 8 guys, I think that'd be fine. Just to have something else going on. I think it'd be interesting. But yeah, so keepers is the topic for next week. So start thinking about that now. Do you want keepers? Do you not want keepers? If you do want keepers, how do you want them to be set up? Because that's something else I'm going to be talking about next week. Do you want your keepers so that it's, you keep them at the round that they were last year, the round -2. So if you take somebody in the first 2 rounds, you can't keep them. But if you draft them in round 3, then you have to use your first round pick. That's not great. But what if you get someone in round 4 that's a first round pick this year? Kenyon Drake, I'm just saying. Then yeah, no, keep that guy in the second round, but you get him as a first instead of use him as a first round pick, and then you still get your first. That's pretty cool. You can figure it out. We're all adults here. We're all big boys. We got our big boy pants on. So yeah, so let's figure this stuff out for the auction versus hybrid versus draft this week. We'll have votes on Friday, and yeah, so let's have a discussion in Slack. I hope it'll be fun. And until then, thank you guys for stopping by. It's been a lot of fun, as always, to talk to you guys and to have these conversations. And it looks like I'm coming in about half an hour per clip on these because, I'm not doing anything too crazy. I'm just having a quick discussion about how people think pros and cons for stuff. But I'm sure these will stretch out to, the full hours, the full hour long podcasts that they were previously because, yeah, those were fun too. But now is not the time for that. So I will see you guys next week. And yeah, thanks so much. Bye bye.